So without further ado, I will start the story. Chapter 18, Magic and Battle. In the dimness of morning, King Narnish watched his armies deploying. They tramped away in columns, jingling and rattling as they went, and formed themselves into the line they would hold. All the fine colors of his nobles did not show up so well at this hour, but then, neither did the niggling little faults among their men. The spearmen, swordsmen, and others, just lately marched away from their farms, did not so easily betray their small clumsiness as they would in the light of day. Now the waiting was done, and the battlefield's judgment would be seen. If Dr. Gobnash could provide what he claimed to be able to provide, they would be fighting man against man, not against that morcar-eaten dry ox driver and his talisman. He turned to the doctor. Your various trickeries are ready, Dr. Gobnash? Yes, Highness. I think they will serve our purpose. Even if my workings don't draw them to waste the power of that talisman, I have something special that will deal with it. Ha! Good! The king wheeled his horse and set off for his chosen post, trailing aides and assistants and hangers-on behind him. The archer slipped onto the field. He had no intention of being caught up in the troops' maneuvers, nor being discovered too early by some under-officer or other. He did want to be close enough to be able to shift himself into the right position, however, if the time ever came. Bloody Narnish's army was marching itself into positions now, so there would be little chance he'd be seen here behind Wenzish lines, and maybe, just maybe, a clear shot at Bloody Narnish's broad, bloody back. Day dawned. Narnish's army was a dark blur in the dimness, then gradually grew clearer. Then, fierce flying pig guts, Thokkel said quietly. Dark destroyer's teeth, echoed Elcoriat. How could we be so far off in assessing their numbers? Even our most exaggerated estimates would barely allow for such numbers. Something strange here. Lucy stared at the troops in front, as if trying to make out something about them. Elcoriat twisted in his saddle. You're not suggesting that Dr. Gobnash has magicked this lot up out of nothing? I'd say he had a lot to do with it. Send some mounted archers down there to shoot at the phalanx right in front of us. Tell them not to take any chances, but just see what happens. He looked at her silently for a moment, then nodded briefly. He gave word, and a messenger trotted out to the Ascos lines. Shortly thereafter, a band of horsemen headed out towards the phalanx. As they approached, the phalanx opened ranks to allow a force of light slingers through. The slingers whirled their slings and let fly their shot, which appeared to have no effect on the horsemen. Arrows were flying now, and suddenly the slingers disappeared. A moment after that, the phalanx disappeared as well. The horsemen, after a moment's confusion, ordered their ranks and rode at the phalanx unit to their right. Arrows flew again, and again the phalanx disappeared. Then the whole front line, some 2 to 10 men deep, depending on whether they were horse, light troops, phalanx, shimmered and vanished. The command group could hear shouting from the nearest Ascos troops. They don't altogether like this, lady, Elcoriat said. They see an illusion vanished and wonder what other crafty tricks Dr. Gobnash might have in his pocket. Down below, the horsemen attacked the second line of the phalanx, and once more slingers came forth to hold them off. This time, when the slingers cast their shot, men and horses went down, and the remainder of the horsemen withdrew quickly, but in order. Elcoriat said, Captain Teheran, will you escort Thokkel over to that knoll on our right? Thokkel, let Teheran advise you on where and when to use the talisman. Certainly, he had no intention of being a simple weapon to be set out and aimed by some other. He'd promised to let Teheran advise him, but he hadn't promised to follow that advice if he had a better idea. If he thought his quiet acquiescence had deceived Teheran, he'd learned otherwise almost at once. I know what you're going to do, Thokkel. Just think before you do it. And ask if perhaps you're just doing it because I suggested you to do something else. Am I so easy to read then? Teheran smiled grimly. Not always, and not by anyone who doesn't know you. Narnish scowled. Our Dr. Gobnash is very ineffective with his trickeries today. His aide said, Well, Highness, at least you'll have them wondering what else he might have in his pack. Or perhaps you'll have them wondering why they need to worry if this is the best he can do. He turned his grim face back toward the field. Order the advance! Yes, Highness. Dr. Gobnash was not in the habit of frowning, though his forehead did wrinkle slightly as he saw the illusion dissipated. He shook his head slightly, a gesture that seemed to indicate he expected better. But no matter. The small guard who were to protect his person while he worked his magic kept their eyes trained in other directions. Fear was a useful tool, though none of them was likely capable of spying on his work to any profit. He took an object from the bag at his side, an object that resembled a child's top, and he held it as such, thumb and forefinger. He uttered a few symbols, then gave the top a flick. Like an ordinary top, it began to spin, but unlike an ordinary top, it spun in midair. As it spun, it began to grow and glow. Shortly, all that could be seen was a tall spinning light, about a man height, barely disturbed the grass as it spun. Dr. Gobnash spoke another imperative syllable, and the glowing mass leaped away. Zigzagging forward, traveling a series of straight-line rushes. He watched it go with a brief nod of satisfaction. Thokkel surveyed what he could see of the field. Narnash seemed intent on overwhelming them, without any special maneuvers. He was, however, holding back a sizable cavalry force, something Thokkel had become familiar with in listening to soldiers talk. The cavalry reserve could have several uses, among them to strike at some weak point in the enemy's formation, or to reinforce any hard-pressed part of their own line. Something caught Thokkel's eye, a glowing shape that rushed across the field. It came in a series of zigzags, pausing briefly before it changed direction. It dashed through Narnish's lines, then through the Askos lines, disordering each momentarily, and kept on coming. Thokkel heard Teheran speaking, but the words seemed vague and far away. All his awareness was on that spinning thing. Then suddenly a hand caught his arm, and he was whipped away out of the world into a place where a forest was burning. They were at the edge of a stream, and all the flames roared and snapped. A sharp wood smoke assaulted their nostrils. A mule snorted and stamped nearby. Then they were back on the battlefield again, on a hillside, looking out over the rear of an army. How does a merchant make a living, grumbled Shapa Kalish, when he must spend half his time rescuing Bataan ox drivers? I suppose my gratitude isn't welcome? First things first. That Shoivompok Dr. Gobnash said after you will be back on your track in a moment or two. Best use the talisman now before it starts to enthrall you again. Thokkel realized that he was in the rear of Narnash's army, but it was unfortunate Teheran wasn't here to advise him in this new circumstance, but he should be able to do enough damage on his own. He considered aiming for Narnash first, but that wouldn't have the likely immediate effect he wanted. He pointed at the center of the phalanx. "O wild storm wind of the eastern sea, blow, blow, blow." He was prepared for the results this time. The wind flinging rain at the troops, even bowling some of them over. A whole section of the line was flung into chaos and disordered. He had to halt the wind very shortly, since the two armies were about to come together, and the wind would show no favor to friend or foe. The wind's phalanx demonstrated its training and had nearly pulled itself together when Asco's pikes hit. Struck first by fierce wind, then enemy pikes, the center of the phalanx began to give way. Thakkel saw a cavalry force on their way over to reinforce the potential gap. He was on the point of sending a wind against them when he noticed a glow. The Schweivompelk was coming again. The battle sounds were far away again, and all his attention was on that glowing thing. Shapakalish's hand was on his arm, pulling him away. They were the burning forest again, burning wood and popping and cracking around them. They stood near a rock that was radiating an intense heat. Then once again they stood on the battlefield, still behind Narnish's lines. Thakkel turned to Shapakalish. "How do we stop that thing?" "Getting rid of Dr. Gobnash should do it. He's over there." He pointed to a group of men about 50 yards away. Thakkel pointed. "Oh, hot wind from the southern wastes, blow, blow, blow." The wind struck, shriveling grass around the wizard's party. The guards assigned to protect Dr. Gobnash staggered, suddenly sweltering in their armor, and began to fall. The slender figure of Dr. Gobnash turned toward them. Then he too was blown flat. Thakkel halted the wind. The Schweivompelk wavered in his direction, then disappeared. Thakkel looked around. The battle was joined. The phalanx he had hit first was still holding, but only because the cavalry had managed to stiffen them. He realized he himself could not do much more damage to Narnish's force. Anything he did against the battle line would affect Asco's troops as much as Wentz. He wondered about striking at Narnish himself, or some of his reserves, and muttered, "Now I need Taharan's advice. I can't get to him." "Do you really want to?" "I don't know. If I were there, I'd be out of the range of most—" "Watch out!" The party of horsemen, no more than 24, had come up over the knoll's reverse slope. Whether some cavalry commander had sent them on some errand, or whether Narnish himself had spotted him in Shapakalish, and had sent them specially, he never knew. Their initial approach had been hidden in the sounds of battle, and now they were almost on top of the two. Almost without conscious thought, Thakkel shouted, "A wild whirlwind! Go against these riders!" Then he dropped to the ground as arrows whipped overhead. Once more, the tiny, inconsequential whirlwind started in the grass before him. Once more it grew strength as it raced towards the enemy, flinging horses and men aside. Then he turned. Shapakalish was lying on the grass, an arrow sticking straight up from his shoulder. The little man was unconscious. The arrow had gone through his shoulder just beside the joint. Thakkel broke the point off and pulled the shaft back through. "Just as well you're not awake for this. It's not something you'd want to feel." He searched in the mule's packs and found some cloth, which he tore into strips for bandages. "I hope this isn't some rare and expensive magical fabric." He just finished wrapping the shoulder when he heard a foot whisper in the grass behind him. He was on his feet in an instant, whipping the ox goad from his belt. 4 men, battered and dazed and more than half mad, were coming at him with swords. The remnants, he realized, of the troop he had destroyed with the whirlwind. These few, driven beyond fear by what they had seen, gathered themselves for one effort to find revenge and perhaps just to strike back. Well, they were too close to use a talisman. He'd just have to see how good a fighter he was. Narnish looked out at the battlefield. The accursed winds had done their work altogether too well for his comfort. He'd had to use some of the cavalry reserve to shore up the phalanx, and whatever trickeries Dr. Gobnish had been hatching had been finished. Had he survived? A part of the king's mind said that death was the only expected price for his failure. Another said the doctor would be needed even more badly after this day. So, where was the best place to send his remaining forces? There was a stirring behind him, and faint and far away a song was being sung by many men. He looked over at his side. "What's that?" "Highness, we're being attacked from behind." "What?" Without awaiting an answer, he pulled his horse and pushed through the ranks to see. Dark Destroyer's teeth! A battle line, including horse, phalanx, and light troops, was coming up. In the midst were banners of Disicomon and Consulate, along with some from Ascos. They weren't lucky enough to destroy him, just enough to force him to use up his reserve. If he were lucky, he'd be able to pull some draw out of this. What was that bloody song they were singing anyway? Fine yellow dust rose up over the battle line, so that anything beyond it was seen, if at all, as dim shapes. Can't see for all his muck, but Narnish's reserve still seems to be in the same place. I'm going to take some of our cavalry and see if I can draw him off. Lusomi looked at Alcoriat. Go ahead. She was queen, and in theory, had the ultimate say, but she knew her limits in military matters. Besides, Alcoriat's notion seemed sound. She continued to watch the battle. Even at this distance, it was not possible to ignore the fact that down there, men were fighting, killing, and dying. She had managed some time ago to deal with her share of responsibility for it. Surely the rule of Bloody Narnish justified extreme measures to remove his heavy hand from their necks? That barely made the results of battle any less awful. The widows, the fatherless children, the cripples. I think I'm going to change that to invalids, so. She knew enough now, from reading and from conversation with Alcoriat and Alcoriat and others, that she had some idea of how the battle was going. Narnish's phalanx had not recovered in full from the wind, and only the cavalry reinforcements saved it from complete destruction. They were holding the Ascos phalanx, fighting like mad, a mass of men on horse and afoot, no longer with the cohesion of the properly formed phalanx. On her own side, the Ascos phalanx was firm and steady. Was that the result of Disikoman's cadres, or simply the result of another year's training and experience? The part of her mind that dealt with trivialities reflected that, in public, where she placed the credit would depend on who she was talking to. Lady, news, lady! A horseman on a panting horse came galloping up. A mixture of dust and sweat streaked both man and beast, and a rider pulled the horse to a stamping halt by her side. The man's expression was triumphant. Lady, Commander Neforio sends to tell you that the standard of Lord Disikoman, among others, has been sighted in the Narnash's rear. They appeared about to engage Narnish himself. Well done. What's your name? Honorio Hisolcut, lady. Get yourself some water and rest, Honorio. You've earned it. Thank you, lady. She was trying frantically to remember which of her commanders was Neforio. She knew the name, she knew it quite well, but could not put a face to it. As queen, she dared not admit to anyone around her that her memory was at fault. She slapped a gloved hand on the saddle bow, then had to still her horse, at which point she realized everyone was wondering who or what had offended her. The ridiculousness of it all made her smile. The ridiculousness of it all made her smile. Men were dying down there, and up here, people were wondering what had offended her. Then there was movement on the right. The lines of battle were shifting. The Wensmen were being pushed back, and then, between one instance and the next, the whole wing was breaking up and fleeing. Then the people around her began to cheer. No, the battle was not done, but it was now a matter of whether she would have a victory or an overwhelming victory. The scrap of brush was a little cover, but the archer had now and then been known to brag. Give me a flat field and a single dandelion growing in the middle, and I'll hide myself. Faintly behind him, he heard the sound of singing. What mad bugger was singing on a battlefield? Then there was a mighty stir among the horsemen up there, and here was Blade and Arnish himself, staring out at the singing, as if it were bad news. The king pushed his helmet back to get a better view. The archer went into action. A series of well-drilled movements. The arrow drew back, his body adjusting. Without thought for the uphill shot, the wind, he loosed. He dropped himself into the fold in the next ground, but next to the bush's root, and then some wildly singing horsemen went riding around him. He wondered if they'd even seen him, or if they'd been so fixed on Arnish they'd missed his small movements. Bum, bum, bum. So that was a shorter chapter tonight, or maybe I was just reading too fast, I'm not sure. But yeah, I guess that's all for this evening. And unless you have any questions, I will talk to you tomorrow. Well, then wait, not tomorrow. Sorry. Monday. Have a good night.